They say all foods are good for your ears, healthy and harmless. But today, I urgently need to warn you about something that very few people know or understand. One of them, which you probably consume almost every day, thinking you're protecting yourself, could be putting your hearing at serious risk after the age of 50. I have seen many of my patients over the decades who consume it daily with pride, firmly believing it is strengthening their body and protecting against diseases without imagining for a second that it might be dangerously damaging the delicate hair cells in the inner ear and dramatically increasing the risk of permanent hearing loss that happens without warning. What is most worrying and frightening about all this is that it's not just one isolated food, but 4 extremely common foods that can become dangerous and even devastating if not combined properly or consumed at the wrong time. I am Dr. Elena Morales, an audiologist specialized in hearing health and age-related hearing loss prevention with over 28 years of clinical experience helping older adults keep their hearing sharp, clear, and completely functional without heavy medication or expensive hearing aids. Now that you know about this hidden risk that few doctors openly mention, I want us to analyze each of these 4 dangerous foods together with full attention. Because it is not about completely eliminating all of them from your diet, creating unnecessary panic, but about deeply understanding when and how they can become extremely dangerous specifically for the aging auditory system of an older adult. And we will start immediately with one that absolutely surprises most of my patients every time I mention it. Many are shocked. Some even refuse to believe it at first. For entire decades, this food was proudly presented as the ultimate emblem of perfect health everywhere. We were told repeatedly that it strengthened bones, provided essential nutrients, and kept the body eternally young and vibrant. And they weren't completely wrong about some real benefits. But after the age of 50, things changed radically inside the body in ways that no one explains to you. And this is exactly where this apparently noble and harmless food can transform into a silent and treacherous enemy of your hearing without you noticing anything. I have seen this countless times in my daily clinical practice over more than 2 decades. Older adults who arrive at my office genuinely worry because despite eating healthily and disciplinedly, they experience unexplained ringing in the ears, growing difficulty hearing conversations, or sudden hearing loss that doesn't improve with any treatment. When we carefully review their entire diet line by line, a clear pattern emerges repeatedly. This specific food every single day without exception. And they don't do this with bad intentions or ignorance. Quite the contrary. They are simply following nutritional advice that worked perfectly in their youth, completely unaware that the body does not react the same way after 55 when everything slows. Metabolism changes, blood circulation weakens, and the delicate structures of the inner ear become vulnerable. What once nourished may now silently damage. The key is in the how and when you consume it, not necessarily whether you consume it or not. You don't need to be afraid and completely eliminate these foods forever, creating unnecessary restrictions. But you absolutely need to respect certain times of the day and certain dangerous food combinations that no one teaches you. But before we reveal which these 4 dangerous foods are and how to properly protect your hearing, if you are finding this video important and useful so far, leave a powerful like right now for the algorithm to show it to more people who urgently need this information that can save their hearing. Subscribe to the channel now to receive weekly honest medical alerts about hearing health after 50 that your doctors don't have time to explain. And activate the notification bell to never miss videos like this that can literally prevent permanent hearing loss. Comment down below urgently. How old are you and which of these foods do you eat every day without knowing the danger? I want to know your story and help you personally with specific guidance. Now let's dive into the first food on this dangerous list that will completely shock you. It's white, it's considered essential, and it's probably in your kitchen right now, waiting to be consumed for breakfast tomorrow. The first food on our list that can become dangerous for your hearing after 50 is dairy products, especially milk and cheese. And I know this will shock many people watching right now. For entire decades, dairy was presented as the ultimate emblem of perfect bone health, the superfood we should all consume daily without question. We were told repeatedly since childhood that it strengthened bones with calcium, prevented osteoporosis, and kept the body eternally strong and resilient. And they weren't completely wrong about these real and proven benefits. Dairy is indeed very rich in essential calcium, protein that builds muscle, and vitamins that genuinely benefit bones, teeth, and overall body structure. But after the age of 50, things change radically inside the body in ways that absolutely no one explains to you in quick consultations. And this is exactly where this apparently noble and harmless food can transform into a silent and treacherous enemy of your hearing without you noticing absolutely anything until it's too late. I have seen this happen countless times in my daily clinical practice over more than 2 decades attending to seniors. Older adults who arrive at my office genuinely worried and confused because despite eating extremely healthily and disciplinedly following all recommendations, they experience persistent ringing in their ears called tinnitus, muffled hearing that worsens progressively, or sudden hearing loss in one ear that terrifies them. When we meticulously review their entire diet, item by item, line by line, a clear and undeniable pattern emerges repeatedly. Dairy products consumed every day without exception, sometimes even 3 or 4 times a day. And they don't do this with bad intentions or deliberate ignorance. Quite the contrary, they are simply following medical and nutritional advice that worked perfectly in their youth when they were 30 or 40, completely unaware that the human body does not react in the same magical way after 55 when absolutely everything progressively slows down. Let me explain exactly why this happens at the cellular biochemical level. Dairy products contain something called casein, a protein that can trigger inflammatory responses in the body, especially as we age. When you are young and vibrant, the immune system handles these proteins without any difficulty, processing everything efficiently. But with the relentless passage of time, inflammation becomes chronic and persistent like a fire that never fully extinguishes. The inner ear, with its delicate hair cells and tiny blood vessels, is extremely vulnerable to this chronic inflammation. Imagine tiny fragile structures inside your ear that depend on perfect blood flow and zero inflammation to function properly. At first, dairy causes no visible damage. Everything seems to work normally. But with the inexorable passage of time, chronic inflammation progressively accumulates, restricting blood flow to the inner ear and damaging the microscopic hair cells that convert sound waves into signals your brain understands. When this happens progressively over months, hearing gradually deteriorates. High-frequency sounds become harder to hear. Conversations in noisy environments become impossible. And one day you realize you're asking people to repeat themselves constantly. I vividly remember a specific patient, Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, a lovely and polite 68-year-old retired librarian. She came to my office after a strange and frightening episode she couldn't explain. One normal morning, while listening to her favorite radio program, she noticed her right ear felt blocked and sounds seemed muffled and distant. She initially thought it was just earwax buildup or allergies. Days later, when it didn't improve, her worried daughter brought her to see me. Detailed hearing tests showed significant high-frequency hearing loss and inflammation markers in her blood. When we deeply analyzed her entire dietary routine in the preceding months, we found a seemingly harmless and healthy habit. Every morning without exception, she drank a large glass of whole milk with cereal, ate cheese with lunch, and had yogurt before bed. Additionally, she was taking calcium supplements prescribed for osteoporosis, an absolutely perfect combination for the hearing disaster that occurred. Her inflammation markers were sky-high, and specialized imaging showed reduced blood flow to the cochlea, the snail-shaped structure in the inner ear responsible for hearing. Carmen looked at me with profound sadness that I still remember clearly, and said something that marked me. "Doctor, I was just trying to keep my bones strong. How could this harm my hearing?" I have heard this devastating sentence more times than I would like throughout my career. Because this is exactly the central problem here. It is not dairy itself that is the villain, but the complete context, the amount consumed, the combination with other inflammatory foods, and the body's changed response after 50. The key is in how, when, and how much dairy you consume, not whether you should or should not consume it. You absolutely do not need to completely eliminate dairy from your life, creating unnecessary fear, but you must respect certain limits and timing. If you genuinely enjoy dairy and want to continue consuming it, limit your intake to small portions once a day, preferably in the morning when the body has more metabolic capacity to process inflammatory proteins efficiently. Absolutely avoid consuming multiple dairy servings throughout the day because this multiplies inflammation. And if your hearing is already showing clear signs of decline or you experience persistent tinnitus, you must consult your doctor before continuing daily dairy consumption. In my extensive clinical experience, a small simple adjustment can make an absolutely dramatic difference between preserved hearing and progressive loss. What is genuinely dangerous and must be avoided is constant and uncontrolled excess, especially consumed late at night when the body's anti-inflammatory systems are weakest. I have seen many patients who made just this simple change, reducing dairy from 3 servings to 1 small serving daily, and they reduced tinnitus, improved hearing clarity, and felt more alert in weeks. Dairy remains a source of nutrition when used correctly. But after 55, it must be treated with respect and knowledge, not with unconscious exaggeration. Now let's move to the second food that also surprises with its popularity, and many consume it thinking it provides energy when in reality it can dangerously damage hearing. The second food on our list that can become dangerous for hearing after 50 is refined sugar and sugary foods. And you probably consume more of it than you realize. Sweet treats, desserts, flavored yogurts, breakfast cereals, sweetened coffee, processed snacks. Sugar is everywhere, hidden in almost everything we eat. For decades, we were told a little sweetness makes life enjoyable. And they were partially right at the time. But there is a disturbing reality that very few older adults know or understand. After 50, excessive sugar consumption can become a silent and serious threat to your hearing. Not because sugar itself is poisonous, but because of how it dangerously affects blood circulation and nerve function throughout the entire body, including the delicate auditory system. Let me explain something I have seen repeatedly in my clinical practice over decades. Older adults who proudly avoid fried foods and excess salt but consume sugary treats daily thinking a little sweetness is harmless. Everything seems perfectly fine and controlled until one day, without any prior warning, they notice their hearing has significantly worsened or they develop constant ringing that never stops. And when we meticulously review their case trying to understand what happened, excessive sugar consumption is there, present almost daily in their diet. The real problem is not an occasional dessert, but the cumulative effect of constant sugar intake on the microscopic blood vessels that feed the inner ear. Sugar causes dramatic spikes in blood glucose levels. When glucose remains elevated consistently, it damages blood vessel walls through a process called glycation. These damaged vessels become stiff, narrow, and unable to deliver adequate oxygen and nutrients to the inner ear. The cochlea, that precious spiral structure responsible for converting sound into neural signals, is extremely sensitive to reduced blood flow. When blood flow decreases even slightly, the hair cells begin to die. And unlike other cells in the body, these hair cells never regenerate. Once they're gone forever, and so is that portion of your hearing. I will never forget Mr. Thomas Chin, a charming 72-year-old retired accountant. He came to my office complaining of progressive hearing loss over 2 years. He couldn't understand why his hearing was failing when he had no history of noise exposure, no ear infections, and no family history of hearing loss. His hearing tests showed a pattern consistent with metabolic damage to the inner ear. When I asked about his diet, he smiled and said, "I have a sweet tooth, doctor. I enjoy dessert after every meal and sweetened coffee throughout the day. It's my only vice." That vice, as he called it, was slowly destroying his hearing from the inside out. His blood sugar levels were consistently elevated, not quite diabetic but close, a condition called prediabetes. This chronic elevation had damaged the tiny blood vessels feeding his inner ear, starving the hair cells of oxygen. The damage was irreversible. We could slow further progression by drastically reducing his sugar intake, but we couldn't restore what was already lost. Thomas was devastated. He said something I'll never forget. "If I had known sugar could steal my hearing, I would have given it up years ago. No dessert is worth losing the sound of my grandchildren's voices." This is the harsh reality of sugar's effect on hearing. It works silently, gradually, without pain or warning. By the time you notice hearing loss, significant damage has already occurred. The most dangerous part is that sugar is addictive. Your brain craves it, and the food industry knows this, adding it to nearly everything. Even foods that don't taste sweet, like bread, pasta sauce, and salad dressings, contain hidden sugars that accumulate throughout the day. After 50, your body's ability to process sugar efficiently declines dramatically. Insulin resistance increases, blood sugar stays elevated longer, and the damage to blood vessels accelerates. So what can you do to protect your hearing from sugar damage? First, drastically reduce or eliminate added sugars from your diet. This means reading labels carefully and avoiding foods with more than 5 grams of added sugar per serving. Second, replace sugary snacks with whole fruits that contain natural sugars balanced with fiber, which slows absorption and prevents blood sugar spikes. Third, never consume sugary foods on an empty stomach. Always pair them with protein or healthy fats to moderate the glucose response. Fourth, if you have prediabetes or diabetes, work closely with your doctor to control blood sugar levels rigorously. Every point your average blood sugar drops reduces the risk of further hearing damage. And fifth, stay hydrated. Water helps flush excess sugar from your bloodstream and supports healthy circulation. I have seen patients who eliminated added sugars and stabilized their blood glucose levels experience remarkable improvements. Their tinnitus decreased, their hearing clarity improved slightly, and most importantly, they stopped the progressive decline that would have left them severely hearing impaired within years. Sugar is not your friend after 50. It's a slow poison that robs you of one of your most precious senses without you realizing until it's too late. Now let's move to the third food that will surprise you even more with its hidden danger. The third food on our list that can seriously damage hearing after 50 is excessive salt and sodium-rich processed foods. And this one hides in almost everything you eat. Canned soups, frozen meals, deli meats, bread, cheese, condiments, restaurant food. Sodium is everywhere, often in shocking amounts. For years, we've been warned about salt's effects on blood pressure and heart health. But what very few people understand is that excessive sodium can directly and severely damage your hearing, especially after 50 when the body's regulatory systems weaken. Let me tell you exactly what happens when you consume too much salt consistently. Sodium causes fluid retention throughout the entire body, including the inner ear. The inner ear contains fluid-filled chambers that must maintain precise pressure and composition for proper hearing function. When you consume excessive sodium, fluid balance in these chambers becomes disrupted. Pressure builds up, similar to what happens in Meniere's disease, causing vertigo, tinnitus, and fluctuating hearing loss. Additionally, high sodium intake elevates blood pressure, which damages the delicate blood vessels feeding the inner ear. These vessels are among the smallest in the entire body, and they're extremely vulnerable to pressure-related damage. I remember clearly Mrs. Patricia Alvarez, an 81-year-old woman who loved convenience foods. Canned soups for lunch, frozen dinners, deli sandwiches. She thought she was eating reasonably well because the label said low-fat and heart-healthy. But when she came to my office complaining of constant ringing and hearing loss, her blood pressure was dangerously high and her sodium intake was nearly triple the recommended amount. The excess sodium had caused chronic fluid retention in her inner ear, creating pressure that damaged the hair cells and auditory nerve. We immediately changed her diet to fresh, low-sodium whole foods. Within weeks, her blood pressure dropped, the ringing decreased, and her hearing stabilized. She couldn't believe that something as simple as salt could cause such devastating effects. The problem with sodium is that it's addictive and hidden. Food manufacturers add massive amounts to processed foods to enhance flavor and extend shelf life. A single serving of canned soup can contain your entire daily sodium allowance. After 50, your kidneys become less efficient at eliminating excess sodium, so it accumulates in your system, causing fluid retention, high blood pressure, and inner ear damage. If you want to protect your hearing, you must drastically reduce sodium intake. Aim for less than 1,500 milligrams daily. Cook fresh foods at home where you control the salt. Avoid processed and packaged foods entirely. Use herbs and spices for flavor instead of salt. And read every label carefully, watching for hidden sodium in unexpected places. Now, the fourth and final food on this list is perhaps the most surprising of all. The fourth food that can devastate your hearing after 50 is caffeine, especially in excessive amounts. Coffee, energy drinks, tea, chocolate, certain medications. Caffeine is everywhere, and most people consume far more than they realize. For decades, caffeine was considered relatively harmless, even beneficial for alertness and metabolism. But what research now shows is that excessive caffeine intake can severely damage hearing, particularly in older adults. Caffeine is a powerful vasoconstrictor, meaning it narrows blood vessels throughout the body, including those feeding the inner ear. When these tiny vessels constrict, blood flow to the cochlea decreases dramatically, starving the hair cells of oxygen and nutrients. Additionally, caffeine stimulates the nervous system, which can trigger or worsen tinnitus. Many of my patients with persistent ringing report that it intensifies significantly after consuming coffee or energy drinks. I treated Mr. David Martinez, a 76-year-old man who drank 6 cups of coffee daily. He developed severe tinnitus and progressive hearing loss. When he reluctantly reduced his caffeine intake to 1 cup per day, his tinnitus decreased by half and his hearing stabilized. He was shocked that his beloved coffee habit was destroying his hearing. If you consume caffeine, limit it to 1 small serving in the morning only. Avoid it entirely if you have tinnitus or hearing loss. Never consume it late in the day when it can disrupt sleep, which is essential for auditory system repair. These 4 foods, dairy, sugar, salt, and caffeine, are not inherently evil. But after 50, they must be consumed with extreme caution, moderation, and awareness. Your hearing depends on it.